The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in September of 1882, and when Florence Walker read the words scrawled across the thin paper, she understood that her life as she knew it had ended. The message was brief, impersonal, detached. Her father had succumbed to cholera 3 days prior in Kansas City, and the boarding house where she had lived and worked for the past 2 years was being seized by creditors to pay his gambling debts. Florence sat on the narrow bed in her rented room above the millinery shop in Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory, and tried to remember how to breathe. At 22 years old, she had already survived more heartbreak than most women twice her age, but this felt different. This felt final. The boarding house had been her inheritance, the one thing her mother had left behind before consumption took her when Florence was just 16. Now even that was gone, swallowed by her father's vices like everything else he had ever touched. She had fled to Santa Fe 2 months ago after the scandal in Kansas City, after the banker's son had made promises he never intended to keep, after the whole town had learned what happened behind the closed doors of his father's study, after the whispers had followed her down every street until she could not bear to show her face in daylight. The women at church had looked at her with such contempt, as though she had been the seducer, as though she had not been the one left ruined and alone when he married the cattle baron's daughter instead. Florence folded the telegram carefully and placed it in the small trunk that held everything she owned in this world: 3 dresses, 2 worn thin at the elbows, a pair of boots that needed resoling, her mother's Bible with the cracked leather binding, a tortoiseshell comb missing 2 teeth. The ruby brooch her grandmother had given her, the only item of any value, which she had sworn never to sell no matter how desperate things became. The knock at her door made her jump. Mrs. Patterson, her landlady, stood in the hallway with her arms crossed over her ample chest and her mouth set in a grim line. "The rent was due yesterday, Miss Walker." "I know, Mrs. Patterson. I will have it for you tomorrow." "I am expecting payment from the dress shop for the alterations I completed last week." The older woman's expression did not soften. "You said that 3 days ago. I cannot afford charity, girl. I have my own bills to pay." "If you do not have the money by Friday, you will need to find other accommodations." Florence nodded, her throat too tight for words. Mrs. Patterson retreated down the hall, and Florence closed the door and leaned against it, pressing her palm against the rough wood as though it could steady the spinning in her head. She had $7.32 to her name. The dress shop owner, Mr. Henderson, owed her $3 for the week's work, but she knew from experience that he would find reasons to dock her pay, would claim the stitching was not fine enough, or that she had taken too long on a particular piece. Even if she received the full amount, it would not be enough for rent and food both. The afternoon sun slanted through her single window, casting long shadows across the bare floor. Florence walked to the wash basin and splashed cold water on her face, then studied her reflection in the small, mottled mirror hanging on the wall. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes. Her auburn hair, once her one claim to beauty, hung limp and dull. She looked exactly like what she was: a woman without prospects, without family, without hope. That evening, while walking back from the dress shop with $2.15, instead of the 3 she had been promised, Florence passed by the general store and saw the notice board covered with advertisements and announcements. Her eyes scanned the usual postings: help wanted for ranch hands, a reward for information about cattle rustlers, an advertisement for patent medicine guaranteed to cure everything from rheumatism to melancholy. Then she saw it. A simple notice, hand-written in neat block letters: respectable woman sought for matrimony. Rancher in Chloride, New Mexico Territory, seeking wife of good character. Room and board provided. Correspondence welcomed. Apply to Robert Whitfield, General Delivery, Chloride. Florence stared at the notice for a long moment. She had heard of such arrangements, of course. Mail-order brides, they called them, though the term always made her think of packages wrapped in brown paper and string. Women who went west to marry men they had never met, drawn by desperation or adventure or the promise of a new beginning. She was not respectable. She was not of good character. The banker's son had made sure everyone in Kansas City knew that, but this rancher in Chloride did not know her story. He could not see the shame written across her face or hear the whispers that had chased her from Missouri. Before she could talk herself out of it, Florence went back to her room and took out her mother's Bible, carefully removing a sheet of writing paper she had tucked between the pages of Psalms. She sat at the small table beneath the window and dipped her pen in ink. "Dear Mr. Whitfield," she began, her hand shaking slightly, "I am writing in response to your notice seeking a wife. I am 22 years old, of sound health and sober habits. I can cook, so manage a household and keep accounts. I am willing to travel to Chloride to meet you if you believe we might suit." She paused, chewing her lower lip. What else could she say? That she was damaged goods, that no decent man would have her if he knew the truth. That she was writing to him not out of any hope for happiness, but out of sheer, clawing desperation. Instead, she wrote, "I understand that marriage is a serious commitment and would approach such an arrangement with appropriate gravity and dedication. If you wish to correspond further, I am staying at the following address in Santa Fe." She signed her name, folded the letter, and sealed it with a drop of wax melted from a candle stub. The next morning, she posted it before she could change her mind, paying the 5 cents for postage with coins she could ill afford to spare. The reply came faster than she had expected, arriving just 10 days later on a Wednesday afternoon. Florence's hands trembled as she broke the seal. "Dear Miss Walker," the letter began, "thank you for your response to my notice. I am pleased to make your acquaintance, even if only through correspondence. I am 31 years old and have owned the Three Rivers Ranch outside Chloride for 8 years. The ranch is successful and profitable, with good water and grazing land. I am seeking a wife because I desire a family and companionship, and because ranch life can be lonely without a partner to share it. If you are amenable, I would welcome you to Chloride. I will send funds for your passage on the stage. We can meet and determine if we suit before making any final commitment. I hope this arrangement is acceptable to you." The letter was signed Robert Whitfield in the same neat handwriting as the notice. Enclosed with the letter was a bank draft for $25, more money than Florence had seen in months. She sat on her bed and read the letter 3 times, searching for hidden meanings or warning signs. The words were straightforward, neither warm nor cold, the tone businesslike but not unkind. She thought about refusing, about returning the money and finding some other way to survive in Santa Fe. But what other way was there? She had no family, no friends, no one who would vouch for her character or help her find decent employment. The women in Santa Fe were as quick to judge as those in Kansas City had been. She had seen it in their eyes when they came into the dress shop, the way they clutched their reticules closer and lowered their voices when she approached. Florence folded the letter and placed it with the bank draft in her trunk. Then she went downstairs to tell Mrs. Patterson she would be leaving at the end of the week. The stage to Chloride left Santa Fe on Monday morning. Florence sat inside the coach with 3 other passengers: a mining engineer heading to Silver City, a Mexican woman traveling to visit her sister, and a cattle buyer who spent most of the journey dozing with his hat pulled low over his eyes. The road was rough, the coach bouncing and swaying over the rutted track that wound through the high desert landscape. Florence watched the scenery pass outside the window. Endless expanses of sage and creosote broken by stark rock formations and distant mountains. The land was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, so different from the green hills of Missouri where she had been born. This was a country that would not suffer fools or weaklings, a place where survival depended on strength and stubbornness, and the ability to endure. Perhaps that was fitting. Perhaps this barren, beautiful land was where she was meant to be after all. They stopped for the night at a way station, a squat adobe building that offered beds and meals to travelers. Florence shared a room with the Mexican woman, who introduced herself as Rosa and who spoke kindly to her in halting English. They ate beans and cornbread by lamplight, and Rosa told her about her sister who had married a farmer near Chloride, about the nephew she had never met who would be 3 years old now. "You go to Chloride also?" Rosa asked, her dark eyes curious but not prying. "Yes," Florence said. "To meet someone." Rosa nodded sagely, as though she understood everything Florence did not say. "It is good to have new beginnings. The old life, sometimes it is better to leave behind." Florence wondered what Rosa was leaving behind, what sorrows or failures or disappointments she carried with her on this journey. But she did not ask. Some stories were too painful to share with strangers. They arrived in Chloride late on Wednesday afternoon. The town was larger than Florence had expected, a proper settlement rather than just a collection of shacks and tents. Buildings lined the main street: a general store, a hotel, a saloon, a church with a white-painted steeple, and a say office, a bank. The sidewalks were wooden planks, and hitching posts stood at regular intervals along the dusty street. Men in dusty work clothes and broad-brimmed hats moved along the sidewalks or stood in clusters talking. A freight wagon rolled past, pulled by 4 massive mules. Somewhere a dog barked, and Florence could hear the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer striking iron. The stage pulled to a stop in front of the hotel, and the driver climbed down to unload the passengers' luggage. Florence accepted his hand and stepped down onto the street, her legs unsteady after 3 days of travel. She looked around, searching for someone who might be Robert Whitfield, but the street was full of strangers' faces. "Miss Walker," she turned. A man stood a few feet away, his hat in his hands. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His face was weathered by sun and wind, handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and a firm jaw darkened by several days' growth of beard. He wore dusty work clothes and scuffed boots, and there was something solid about him, something steady and real that made her think of oak trees and granite cliffs. "Yes," she managed. "Are you Mr. Whitfield?" "Robert," he said, moving closer. "Just Robert is fine. Welcome to Chloride." His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or perhaps Arkansas. He looked her over, not with the leering assessment she had learned to recognize and fear, but with simple curiosity, as though trying to reconcile her appearance with whatever image he had formed from her letter. Florence was suddenly, painfully aware of how she must look after 3 days on the stage, her dress wrinkled and dusty, her hair coming loose from its pins, her face flushed and travel-worn. She resisted the urge to smooth her skirt or pat her hair into place. "Thank you for the travel funds," she said. "The journey was not difficult." Robert nodded. "I have a room arranged for you at the hotel. I thought you might want to rest and get your bearings before we talk. Would tomorrow be soon enough? I could call on you in the afternoon, and we could take a walk, Get to know each other a bit. The consideration in his offer surprised her. She had half expected him to take her straight to a preacher, to seal the arrangement before she could change her mind or he could discover what she really was. But he was giving her time, space to think, the option to refuse if she chose. Tomorrow would be fine, she said. He picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing and carried it into the hotel. The proprietor, a thin man with a gray mustache, greeted Robert by name and handed over a key without being asked. Robert led Florence upstairs to a small but clean room overlooking the main street. "The room is paid for through the end of the week," he said, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. "Meals are included. If you need anything at all, just tell Mr. Garrett downstairs. He will add it to my account." He paused in the doorway, his hat still in his hands. "I hope you will be comfortable here, Miss Walker. I am glad you came." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs, and Florence was alone in the quiet room with its narrow bed and washstand, and the golden afternoon light streaming through the curtains. She sat on the edge of the bed and wondered what she had gotten herself into. That night she barely slept. Every sound seemed magnified, the voices from the saloon down the street, the bark of dogs, the creak of the hotel settling, the whisper of wind against the window. She lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about Robert Whitfield, about his steady gray eyes and his careful courtesy, about the way he had looked at her as though she might be something precious rather than something damaged and discarded. When morning finally came, she washed in the basin and put on her best dress, a dark blue calico that she had mended so many times she had lost count. She plaited her hair and wound it into a simple bun, then studied herself in the mirror and tried to see what Robert would see when he looked at her. A plain face, too thin, too worn for 22. Nothing special, nothing worth choosing. She went downstairs for breakfast and found the dining room half full of boarders and travelers. She ate scrambled eggs and biscuits and tried not to think about the afternoon to come. Robert arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes, his dark hair slicked back with water. He offered her his arm, and they walked together down the main street toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and the mountains rose dark against the brilliant sky. "Tell me about yourself," Robert said. "Your letter said you could keep house and cook." "Did you learn that from your mother?" Florence chose her words carefully. "Yes. My mother ran a boarding house in Kansas City. She taught me everything about managing a household before she died." All true, though it omitted the years in between, omitted her father's decline into gambling and drink, omitted the shame that had driven her west. "I am sorry about your mother," Robert said. "It is hard to lose family. I lost my parents to fever when I was 19. That is when I decided to come west, to make something of myself rather than working someone else's land back in Arkansas." "You have done well for yourself," Florence said. "Your letter mentioned the ranch is successful." He nodded. "Three Rivers sits in a good valley, with water year-round and grass that stays green even in the dry months. I run about 400 head of cattle, mostly crossbred Longhorns and Herefords. I have 3 hired hands who live on the property, and we manage well enough. But it is a lot of work, and it would be easier with a partner." He glanced at her. "I will be honest with you, Miss Walker. I am not a romantic man. I do not have pretty words or fancy manners. But I am honest and I am steady, and I will provide for you and treat you with respect. That is all I can promise." The words should have disappointed her, should have felt cold and transactional. Instead, they settled something inside her. He was not promising love or passion or happily ever after. He was promising honesty. She could work with honesty. "I appreciate your candor," she said. "I should be honest with you as well, Mr. Whitfield. I am not the respectable woman your notice sought." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "What do you mean?" Florence took a breath, feeling the weight of shame and fear pressing against her ribs. But he had been honest, and she owed him the same. "In Kansas City, I was involved with a man. He made promises, but he did not keep them. When his family discovered the relationship, he married someone else and left me to deal with the consequences and the scandal. That is why I left Kansas City. The whole town knew, and I could not find decent work or hold my head up on the street. I am sorry to deceive you by coming here, but I wanted you to know the truth before we went any further." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Florence waited for him to turn away to tell her the arrangement was off, to leave her stranded in this strange town with nowhere to go and no way to survive. Instead, he said, "Thank you for telling me. I know that could not have been easy." "You must think I am terrible," Florence said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think you are human," Robert said. "I think you trusted someone who proved unworthy of that trust. I think you made a mistake, as all of us do. I do not see how that makes you terrible." Florence looked up at him, searching his face for signs of judgment or disgust. But his expression was simply thoughtful, his gray eyes calm. "You do not mind?" she asked. "I mind that someone hurt you," he said. "I mind that you were made to feel ashamed for something that was not entirely your fault. But I do not mind that you are not perfect, Miss Walker. I am not looking for perfection. I am looking for a partner, someone real and honest and willing to build a life together. If you are willing to try, then I am too." The words broke something inside her, some hard shell that she had built around her heart to keep out further pain. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, hot and unexpected. "I am sorry," she said, wiping at her face with shaking hands. "I am not usually so emotional." Robert pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. "You have nothing to apologize for." They walked back to the hotel in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now, the weight of her secret lifted and shared. At the hotel door, Robert paused. "I would still like to marry you, Miss Walker, if you are willing, but I want you to be sure. Take your time. Think about it. I will come by tomorrow and you can give me your answer then." Florence nodded, clutching his handkerchief in her hand. She watched him walk away down the street, his long stride easy and confident, and she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not love, not yet, but maybe hope. Maybe the first tentative shoots of trust beginning to grow in ground she had thought too poisoned to support new life. That night, she knelt beside the bed in her hotel room and prayed for the first time since leaving Kansas City. She did not pray for happiness or for love. She prayed for courage, for wisdom, for the strength to build something good from the ruins of her past. When Robert came the next afternoon, she was waiting for him in the hotel lobby. "I would like to marry you," she said before he could speak, "if the offer still stands." Robert smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face into something warmer, something that made her heart beat faster. "The offer stands. We can go see the preacher now if you like, or we can wait, whatever you prefer." "Now," Florence said. She had learned the danger of waiting, of giving fear and doubt time to take root and grow. They walked together to the white church on the hill, and the preacher married them there in his parlor with his wife and the church secretary as witnesses. Robert slipped a plain gold band onto Florence's finger, and she promised to love and honor him, and then it was done. She was Florence Whitfield now, wife to a rancher she had known for less than 2 days. Robert took her to the general store and told her to choose whatever she needed: practical dresses for ranch work, sturdy boots, a warm coat for winter, a new hat to keep the sun off her face. Florence protested that it was too much, but he just shook his head. "You are my wife now. I take care of what is mine." The words should have rankled, should have made her feel like property. Instead, they made her feel safe for the first time in years. They ate supper at the hotel restaurant, and Robert told her about the ranch, about the rhythms of the work and the seasons, about the 3 men who worked for him. Miguel, who had been with him since the beginning, Tom, a young cowhand from Texas, and Chen, a Chinese cook and general handyman who could fix anything and made the best biscuits in the territory. "They are good men," Robert said. "I trust them with my life, but I want you to know that the ranch house is yours, Florence. You run it how you see fit. They will respect that, and so will I." After supper, Robert hired a buckboard to take them out to 3 Rivers. They drove through the gathering dusk, the wagon wheels creaking, the horses' hooves clip-clopping on the hardpack road. The air smelled of sage and dust and the promise of cooler weather to come. "Are you nervous?" Robert asked after they had been driving for a while. Florence considered lying, then decided against it. "Yes, everything is happening so fast. This morning I was Florence Walker, alone in the world. Now I am Florence Whitfield, married to a man I barely know, heading to a ranch I have never seen." "I am nervous too," Robert admitted. "I have lived alone for a long time. I am not sure I remember how to share my space with another person." The honesty eased her anxiety. They were both uncertain, both taking a leap into the unknown. Somehow that made it easier. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise. A sprawling adobe house with a red tile roof, corrals and outbuildings scattered around it, a windmill turning slowly in the evening breeze. Beyond the house, grassland stretched toward the dark shapes of mountains on the horizon, and Florence could hear the sound of running water. "The creek runs through the eastern pasture," Robert said, following her gaze. "That is where the ranch gets its name. 3 Rivers Creek, though it is really just one creek that splits into 3 channels during spring runoff." He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The house was larger than she had expected, with a big main room dominated by a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast iron stove and a long wooden table, and 3 bedrooms opening off a hallway. The furniture was plain but well made, and everything was surprisingly clean. "Chen does his best to keep the place livable," Robert said, setting her trunk down. "But it needs a woman's touch. You should feel free to change whatever you like." He showed her the bedroom they would share, and Florence felt her cheeks grow warm. The room held a large bed covered with a faded quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a chair by the window. Robert set her trunk at the foot of the bed, then stepped back. "I will give you some time to settle in," he said. "I need to check on the horses before full dark anyway. The washroom is through that door, and there is water in the pitcher. Make yourself at home." He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Florence sat on the edge of the bed and tried to absorb everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, she had been facing eviction in Santa Fe, penniless and alone. Now she was married and standing in her own bedroom in a ranch house in the middle of the New Mexico territory. She unpacked her trunk, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe and placing her mother's Bible on the bedside table. Then she washed her face and brushed out her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. She changed into her nightgown and sat in the chair by the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. When Robert returned, he knocked softly on the door before entering. He had washed as well, his hair damp, his shirt changed. He looked at her sitting by the window with her hair loose, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You are beautiful," he said quietly. No one had ever called her beautiful before. Pretty, sometimes, when she was younger. Handsome, occasionally, but never beautiful. "I am not," she said. "But thank you for saying so." Robert crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his. Florence, I want you to know that I will not rush you. I know this is all very sudden, and I know you have been hurt before. We do not have to do anything you are not ready for. We can take our time getting to know each other." The kindness in his words, the care and consideration, made her eyes sting with unshed tears. She reached out and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw beneath her palm. "I am not afraid of you," she said. "I am just afraid that I will disappoint you, that I will not be what you need." Robert turned his head and kissed her palm. "You could never disappoint me. You came all this way on faith alone. You trusted me when you had no reason to. That takes courage." "It was desperation more than courage," Florence said honestly. "Sometimes there is not much difference between the two." He stood and drew her to her feet, and they stood together in the quiet room with the last light fading outside the window. Then Robert bent and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing warmth. Florence responded tentatively, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingers. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Robert rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am sure," Florence whispered. That night Robert was patient and tender, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And when it was over and they lay together in the darkness, Florence rested her head on his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart and thought that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could belong. The next morning, Florence woke to pale light filtering through the curtains and the sound of men's voices outside. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned. The wedding, the drive to the ranch, the night spent in Robert's arms. She turned her head and found him still asleep beside her, his face relaxed, one arm thrown across the pillow. She slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake him, and dressed in one of her new work dresses. In the kitchen, she found a Chinese man stirring something in a pot on the stove. He looked up as she entered and smiled. "You must be Mrs. Whitfield. I am Chen. Welcome to Three Rivers." "Thank you," Florence said. "Can I help with breakfast?" Chen looked surprised. "You do not need to cook, madam. That is my job." "I would like to help," Florence said. "I am not used to sitting idle." Chen studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. You can slice the bread and set the table. The men will be in soon." They worked together in comfortable silence, and Florence found the rhythm of the task soothing. Chen was an efficient cook, moving around the kitchen with practiced ease. The food smelled wonderful: bacon and eggs and fresh biscuits and strong coffee. Robert came in just as they were finishing, his hair wet from washing. He smiled when he saw Florence helping with breakfast. "I see you have met Chen." "Yes," Florence said. "He has been very welcoming." Tom and Miguel came in shortly after, both removing their hats when they saw Florence. Tom was young, barely 20, with sandy hair and a sunburned face. Miguel was older, perhaps 40, with graying hair and kind dark eyes. "Madam," they said in unison, and Florence smiled at their awkwardness. "Please call me Florence. We are all going to be working together. There is no need for formality." They ate breakfast around the long table, and the men talked about the work that needed doing. Cattle to check, fences to mend, supplies to order from town. Florence listened and asked questions, trying to understand the rhythms of ranch life. After breakfast, Robert showed her around the property properly. He introduced her to the horses in the barn, showed her the chicken coop and the vegetable garden that Chen tended, explained the layout of the corrals and outbuildings. Everything was well maintained, organized, evidence of care and hard work. "I usually ride out with Tom and Miguel to check the herds," Robert said. "Chen stays here to handle the cooking and repairs, but you should not feel obligated to stay at the house all day. If you want to learn to ride, I can teach you. If you want to help with the ranch work, you are welcome to." "I would like that," Florence said. "I would like to be useful." Robert took her hand. "You are useful just by being here. But I understand the need to contribute, to feel like you are pulling your weight. We will figure it out together." Over the following weeks, Florence settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She helped Chen with the cooking and cleaning, learning his methods and preferences. She planted herbs by the kitchen door and began planning a larger garden for spring. She mended clothes and linens, organized the storeroom, and began keeping the household accounts in a ledger Robert provided. Robert taught her to ride on a gentle mare named Daisy, spending patient hours in the corral teaching her how to sit the saddle, how to guide the horse with reins and legs, how to trust the animal beneath her. Florence had never ridden before, and at first she was terrified. But Robert was patient and encouraging, and gradually she gained confidence. "You are a natural," he told her one afternoon as she trotted Daisy in a circle around the corral. "Most people take twice as long to get comfortable in the saddle." Florence felt a swell of pride at his words. Small accomplishments, but they mattered. Each new skill learned, each challenge overcome, made her feel more capable, more valuable. In the evenings, after supper, she and Robert would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. They talked about their days, about their pasts, sharing stories and memories. Florence learned about Robert's childhood in Arkansas, about the hardscrabble farm where he had grown up, about his dreams of building something better. Robert learned about her mother's kindness, about the years running the boarding house, about the books she had loved to read before life had become too hard for such luxuries. But Florence never spoke about the banker's son, about the promises broken and the trust betrayed. That wound was still too raw, too painful to examine even in the safety of Robert's presence. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Miguel rode into the ranch yard at full gallop, his horse lathered and breathing hard. "Boss, we have trouble," he called. "Rustlers hit the south pasture last night, took maybe 20 head. Robert was on his feet immediately. "How many riders?" Tom found tracks for at least 4 horses, maybe more. "Trail heads west toward the Gila." Robert turned to Florence, his face grim. "I need to go after them. If we move fast, we might catch up before they reach the river." "Is it dangerous?" Florence asked, fear clutching at her heart. "Probably. Rustlers do not usually surrender without a fight, but I cannot let them steal my cattle. If word gets out that 3 Rivers is an easy target, we will have every outlaw in the territory coming after our stock." He went inside to get his rifle and saddlebags, and Florence followed him, her mind racing. "How long will you be gone?" 2 days, maybe 3. "Depends on how far they have gotten and whether we can recover the cattle." He checked the rifle, making sure it was loaded, then turned to her. "Chen and Tom will stay here. You will be safe, but keep the doors locked at night and the rifle loaded just in case." Florence nodded, trying to keep the fear from her face. Robert pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I will come back," he promised. "I have too much here worth coming back to." Then he was gone, riding out with Miguel into the gathering dusk. Florence stood on the porch and watched until they disappeared from sight, and for the first time since coming to 3 Rivers, she felt truly alone. The next 2 days dragged by slowly. Florence threw herself into work, baking bread and pies, scrubbing floors that did not need scrubbing, mending clothes that barely needed mending. Chen watched her with quiet sympathy but did not comment. Tom came in for meals looking worried and distracted. On the 3rd day, just before sunset, Florence was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard hoofbeats. She stood, shading her eyes against the low sun, and saw Robert and Miguel riding in, leading a string of cattle. Relief flooded through her. so intense it made her knees weak. Robert dismounted and walked toward her, his face dusty and tired but breaking into a smile when he saw her. Florence ran to him and threw her arms around his neck, not caring that he was dirty and sweaty and probably had not slept in 3 days. "You are back," she said against his shoulder. "You are safe. I told you I would come back," Robert said, his arms tightening around her. "Did you doubt me? Every minute you were gone." That evening, after Robert had washed and eaten and checked on the recovered cattle, he told Florence about the pursuit. They had caught up with the rustlers near the Gila River, and there had been a brief exchange of gunfire. One of the rustlers had been wounded and the others had fled, abandoning the stolen cattle. "We let them go," Robert said. "We got the cattle back, and that is what matters. I am not interested in revenge, just in protecting what is ours." Florence thought about his words that night as she lay beside him in bed, listening to him sleep. He was a good man, she realized, not just honest and hardworking, but genuinely good. He could have pursued the rustlers, could have sought violence and retribution. Instead, he had chosen mercy, had been satisfied with recovering his property and letting the matter end there. She was beginning to care for him, she realized. Maybe more than care. Maybe something deeper, something that scared her because she had sworn never to trust again, never to give her heart to a man who could break it. But Robert was not like the banker's son. Robert kept his promises. Robert treated her with respect and kindness. Robert made her feel valued and safe. The seasons turned, and autumn gave way to winter. Snow came to the mountains, and the days grew short and cold. Florence learned to preserve food for the winter months, working with Chen to salt meat and pickle vegetables and store root crops in the cellar. She knitted socks and scarves for everyone on the ranch, working by lamplight in the evenings while Robert read the newspaper or kept the accounts. Christmas came, and Florence made a special dinner with roast beef and sweet potatoes and apple pie. Tom produced a harmonica and played carols, his music filling the warm kitchen. Miguel told stories in Spanish that Chen translated, making everyone laugh. Robert gave Florence a leather-bound journal and a set of good pens, and she was touched that he had remembered her love of writing. "I thought you might want to keep a record of your days here," he said. "Your thoughts and observations, something to look back on in years to come." Florence held the journal against her chest and felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is perfect." That night, lying in the darkness with snow falling softly outside the window, Florence turned to Robert and said, "I am happy here. I did not think I could be happy again, but I am." Robert kissed her forehead. "Good, that is all I want, Florence, your happiness." She wanted to tell him that she loved him, but the words stuck in her throat. Love was dangerous. Love could be taken away. Love could be used as a weapon against you. So instead, she just held him close and let her actions speak what her words could not. Winter deepened, and life on the ranch settled into quiet routines. The cattle were brought into the lower pastures where the grazing was better. The men spent their days hauling hay and chopping wood and making repairs to buildings and equipment. Florence and Chen kept the household running, cooking and cleaning and caring for the chickens, and the few milk cows kept near the house. In February, a blizzard swept through the territory, dumping 3 feet of snow and trapping everyone inside for nearly a week. The men took turns going out to feed the animals and check on the cattle, but otherwise they stayed in the house, huddled near the fire. Florence had never been so glad for company. She and Chen baked bread and made stew and kept the coffee pot constantly filled. Tom taught her to play poker, and she discovered she had an unexpected talent for the game, winning hand after hand until Miguel accused her of counting cards. "I am just lucky," she protested, laughing. "Luck that good is suspicious," Miguel said, but he was grinning. Robert watched her with his steady gray eyes, and Florence caught him smiling more than once. Later, when they were alone, he said, "You fit here, with us. I do not think I realized how much this place needed you until you came." "I needed this place too," Florence said. "I needed all of you." Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts, the ground turning to mud. But eventually the grass began to green, and wildflowers bloomed across the hills, and the air smelled of growth and possibility. Robert hired extra hands for the spring roundup, temporary workers who would help gather the cattle and drive them to market. The ranch became a bustling place, full of activity and noise. Florence found herself cooking for a dozen men, baking bread and biscuits by the hundreds, making enormous pots of stew and beans. It was exhausting work, but she found she did not mind. The men were respectful and grateful, and it felt good to be needed, to be contributing in a tangible way to the ranch's success. One evening, after the hired hands had settled into the bunkhouse for the night, Robert found Florence on the porch. She was sitting on the steps, her head tilted back, looking at the stars scattered thick across the black sky. "Tired?" he asked, settling beside her. "Exhausted," she admitted, "but in a good way." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the whisper of wind through the grass, the distant call of an owl, the murmur of voices from the bunkhouse. "I have been thinking," Robert said eventually, "about the future, about what we want from this life." Florence felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. "What have you been thinking?" "I would like to have a family," Robert said carefully. "Children. But only if you want that too. I know we have not talked about it, and I do not want to assume." Florence was quiet for a moment, thinking about children, about the possibility of bringing new life into the world. She had wanted children once, before Kansas City, before everything had fallen apart. The banker's son had promised her children, a home, a future, but those had been lies. Robert's promise was different. Robert's promise was real. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like to have children with you." Robert took her hand and squeezed it. "Good. That makes me very happy." A month later, Florence realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Chen, who nodded sagely and began making ginger tea to help with the nausea that had started plaguing her in the mornings. "Does Robert know?" Chen asked. "Not yet. I wanted to be certain before I told him." But Robert noticed her sickness, noticed the way she pushed food around her plate and turned pale at certain smells. One morning, after she had rushed outside to be sick in the bushes, he followed her and held her hair back while she heaved, then helped her to the bench by the kitchen door. "How long?" he asked gently. "Almost 2 months, I think." Robert's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen from him. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Are you happy?" Florence asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy, Florence, I am beyond happy. You have given me everything I ever wanted, a home, a partner, and now a child. How could I be anything but grateful?" But as the weeks passed and her belly began to swell, Florence found herself wrestling with fear. Not fear of childbirth, though that was certainly daunting. Fear of something deeper, something she could barely articulate even to herself. One night, as she and Robert lay in bed, she finally found the courage to voice it. "What if I am a terrible mother?" she whispered into the darkness. "What if I fail this child the way I have failed at everything else?" Robert rolled onto his side to face her. "What are you talking about? You have not failed at anything." "I failed in Kansas City. I made terrible choices. I let myself be used and discarded. I ran away instead of facing the consequences. Florence, you were young and naive, and a man took advantage of that. That does not make you a failure. That makes you human. But what if I pass that weakness on to our child? What if I am not strong enough or good enough? Robert cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. You are one of the strongest people I have ever known. You came west alone with nothing but a suitcase and faith. You married a stranger. You built a life here from nothing. You wake up every day and work until you can barely stand. You take care of all of us without complaint. If that is not strength, I do not know what is. You see me differently than I see myself, Florence said, tears spilling down her cheeks. Maybe that is because I see you clearly, and you are still looking at yourself through the eyes of people who wanted to make you feel small. His words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs, because he was right. She was still hearing the voices of the women in Kansas City, still seeing herself through the eyes of the banker's son who had looked at her with contempt when his father discovered their affair. "I am not worthy," she whispered. "I am not worthy of you or this life or this child." "Stop," Robert said firmly. "Stop saying that. You are worthy, Florence. You have always been worthy. The fact that other people could not see your value does not diminish it." But Florence could not stop. The words came pouring out, all the shame and self-loathing she had been carrying for so long. "I am damaged. I am used. I am not good enough to be anyone's wife or anyone's mother. You should have married someone better, someone pure and untouched and worthy of your kindness." "I married exactly the woman I wanted," Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. "I married you, Florence. Not some imaginary perfect woman, but you with all your scars and fears and doubts. And I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." "Why?" Florence sobbed. "Why would you choose someone like me?" "Because I love you," Robert said simply. "I have loved you since the day you stepped off that stage looking scared and determined and so damn brave. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubbornness. I love the way you throw yourself into every task like it is the most important thing in the world. I love the way you laugh at Tom's terrible jokes and argue with Miguel about how to season the stew and work alongside Chen in the kitchen like you have been partners for years. I love coming home and knowing you are here, that this is our home, our life. I love you, Florence, and nothing you say can convince me that loving you is wrong." Florence stared at him through her tears, barely able to process his words. "You love me." "I love you," Robert repeated. "I have wanted to tell you for months, but I was afraid of pushing too hard, of making you feel obligated to say it back. But I am telling you now because you need to hear it. You are loved, Florence. You are valued. You are worthy of every good thing in this world." She broke then, sobbing against his chest while he held her and murmured reassurances. All the walls she had built around her heart crumbled, and she let herself feel everything she had been holding back: the love, the hope, the possibility of happiness. "I love you too," she finally whispered against his skin. "I have been so afraid to say it, so afraid to trust it. But I do. I love you, Robert." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Florence felt something inside her shift and settle. She was not healed, not entirely. The scars from Kansas City would always be there, the memories of betrayal and shame. But maybe Robert was right. Maybe those scars did not define her. Maybe she could be both wounded and strong, both damaged and worthy. The next morning, Florence woke feeling lighter than she had in years. She got up and made breakfast with Chen, and when the men came in to eat, she smiled at them and felt the smile reaching all the way down to her bones. Robert caught her eye across the table and winked, and Florence felt warmth spread through her chest. She was loved. She was home. She was going to have a baby with a man who saw her value even when she could not see it herself. The pregnancy was not easy. Florence was sick constantly during the first months, and as her belly grew, simple tasks became difficult. But Robert was patient and attentive, helping her with chores when he could, insisting she rest when she needed to. Chen made special foods to tempt her appetite, and Tom built her a rocking chair for the baby's room. Miguel carved a cradle from pine, sanding it until the wood was smooth as glass. As autumn arrived again, Florence felt the baby moving inside her, small flutters at first, then stronger kicks that made her gasp. Robert would rest his hand on her belly in the evenings, marveling at the movement beneath his palm. "Strong," he would say. "This one is going to be a fighter." "Like mother, like child," Florence said, and she meant it without irony this time. The baby came in late November, during the first snowfall of the season. The labor was long and difficult, lasting from dawn until well past midnight. Florence had never known such pain existed, wave after wave of agony that left her gasping and sobbing. Robert stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. Chen had sent Tom to town to fetch the midwife, a Mexican woman named Senora Alvarez, who had delivered half the babies in the county. She arrived in the afternoon and took charge immediately, shooing the men out of the room and settling in to coach Florence through the contractions. "You are strong," Senora Alvarez said in her accented English. "You can do this. Your body knows what to do." Florence wanted to argue that she was not strong, that she could not do this, that it was too much. But there was no choice. The baby was coming whether she felt ready or not. Finally, as the clock struck 1 in the morning, Senora Alvarez said, "One more push, Senora. One more big push and you will meet your baby." Florence gathered every scrap of strength she had left and pushed, and suddenly there was a release, a rush, and the sound of a baby crying. Senora Alvarez held up a red, squalling infant, and Florence saw through her tears that they had a son. "A boy," Senora Alvarez said, smiling. "A beautiful, healthy boy." She cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Florence's arms. Florence looked down at her son's tiny, perfect face and felt something break open inside her, a flood of love so intense it was almost frightening. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one, we have been waiting for you." The door opened and Robert appeared, his face anxious. "Florence." "Are you all right? Come meet your son," Florence said, and Robert crossed the room in 3 long strides. He looked down at the baby in Florence's arms, and his expression was one of pure wonder. "Our son," he said softly. He reached out and gently touched the baby's cheek with one calloused finger. "He is so small. He will grow," Florence said. "We will make sure he grows strong and healthy and loved." "What should we name him?" Robert asked. Florence had been thinking about this for months. "I would like to name him after your father." "What was his name?" "James," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "James Thomas." "James," Florence repeated, testing the name. "James Whitfield, yes, that is perfect." Over the following weeks, Florence recovered from the birth and settled into motherhood. James was a good baby, healthy and alert, with Robert's gray eyes and a crop of dark hair. Florence spent hours just watching him sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, the way his mouth moved as though he were dreaming of nursing. Robert was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor when James cried in the night, changing diapers without complaint, sitting with Florence during the endless nursing sessions. The hired hands treated the baby like he was made of spun glass, their rough hands gentle when they held him, their voices soft when they spoke to him. Christmas that year was magical. Florence dressed James in a gown Chen had sewn, white linen with delicate embroidery around the collar. They gathered in the main room, and Tom played carols on his harmonica while Miguel sang along in Spanish. Chen produced gifts for everyone: leather gloves he had made, a scarf for Florence, a wooden rattle for James, Florence had never been so happy. She looked around the room at the people who had become her family. At the home she and Robert had built together, at the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt grateful beyond words. But in the quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts, Florence still struggled with feelings of unworthiness. She would look at James and think about all the ways she could fail him, all the mistakes she could make. She would watch Robert playing with his son and wonder when he would realize he had made a mistake marrying her. One afternoon in early spring, after James had turned 4 months old, Florence was sitting on the porch nursing him when Tom came riding in fast, his horse lathered. "Mrs. Whitfield is the boss here. He is checking the south fence line. What is wrong?" "There is a man in town asking about you. Henderson at the general store sent me to warn you. He says the man claims to be your husband." Florence felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "A fellow from Kansas City," Henderson said. "Showed up yesterday asking if anyone knew Florence Walker. Henderson did not tell him anything, but he thought you should know." Florence's mind raced. It could not be the banker's son. He had no claim on her, no legal tie. Unless he had come to make more trouble, to expose her past to everyone in Chloride, to ruin the life she had built here. "Where is this man now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Still in town, far as I know. Staying at the hotel." "Thank you for telling me, Tom. Please go find Robert and let him know. Tell him I am fine, but he should come home." After Tom left, Florence carried James inside and handed him to Chen. "Can you watch him for a bit? There is something I need to do." Chen took the baby, his expression concerned. "Are you all right?" "I will be," Florence said, though she was not sure she believed it. She went to her bedroom and changed into her riding clothes, then went to the barn and saddled Daisy. Her hands shook as she tightened the cinch, but she forced herself to focus. She was not the same frightened girl who had fled Kansas City. She was Florence Whitfield, rancher's wife and mother. She could face whatever this man wanted. The ride to Chloride took less than an hour. Florence tied Daisy outside the hotel and went inside, her heart pounding. The desk clerk looked up as she entered. "I am looking for a man from Kansas City," she said. "He arrived yesterday." The clerk's expression was carefully neutral. "Room 7. "But madam," Mr. Whitfield said. Florence did not wait to hear what Robert had said. She climbed the stairs and knocked on the door of room 7. The man who opened it was not the banker's son. He was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and tired eyes. He wore a suit that had seen better days, and he looked at Florence with an expression of relief. "Miss Walker." "Or should I say Mrs. Whitfield? Who are you?" Florence demanded. "My name is Harold Peterson. I am an attorney from Kansas City. I have been searching for you for nearly 2 years on behalf of your late father. My father is dead. I received word of it before I left Santa Fe." "Yes, I know. I am sorry for your loss, but there are matters that need to be settled. May I speak with you?" Florence hesitated, then nodded. "We can talk in the hotel dining room." They went downstairs and sat at a corner table. Mr. Peterson opened his leather satchel and pulled out several documents. "I will be direct, Mrs. Whitfield. Your father's creditors did indeed seize the boarding house as you were told. However, your father had another asset that was not mentioned in the initial communications. A trust fund established by your maternal grandmother, held in a bank in St. Louis. The money was to be released to you upon your father's death or your 25th birthday, whichever came first." Florence stared at him. "A trust fund? I knew nothing about this." "Your father was not permitted to access the funds, and I suspect he preferred you did not know about them. But as your father's estate attorney, I am required to inform you. The trust contains approximately $8,000. Florence felt dizzy. $8,000. It was an enormous sum, more money than she had ever imagined having. Why are you telling me this now? Why did you have to track me down? The bank requires your signature to release the funds. Also, there was a letter from your grandmother to be delivered to you upon your father's death. I have it here. He handed her an envelope, yellowed with age. Florence recognized her grandmother's spidery handwriting. For my granddaughter Florence, to be opened upon my death or her father's death, whichever comes second. Florence broke the seal with shaking hands and unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Florence, it began. If you are reading this, then both your mother and I are gone, and I pray you have survived your father's weaknesses and vices. I know him for what he is, and I have done what I can to protect you from his worst impulses. The money in this trust is yours, free and clear. Use it to build a good life, the life your mother would have wanted for you. You are stronger than you know, child. You are your mother's daughter, never forget that. With all my love, grandmother. Tears streamed down Florence's face as she read the words. Her grandmother had known, had understood, had tried to protect her even from beyond the grave. There is one more thing, Mr. Peterson said gently. The banker's son you were involved with, the one who caused you such trouble. He was arrested 6 months ago for embezzlement. His father discovered he had been stealing from the bank for years. He is in prison now, serving a 10-year sentence. I thought you might want to know that justice was served in a way. Florence sat back in her chair, trying to process everything. The money, the letter. The knowledge that the man who had ruined her reputation was now ruined himself. What do I need to do? She asked finally. Just sign these papers, and I will arrange for the funds to be transferred to a bank here in New Mexico Territory, unless you would prefer them sent elsewhere. Here is fine, the bank in Chloride. She signed the documents with a hand that gradually grew steadier. Mr. Peterson witnessed her signature, then packed up his papers. That is all I need, Mrs. Whitfield. The money should be available within 2 weeks. I wish you all the best. After he left, Florence sat alone in the dining room for a long time, her grandmother's letter clutched in her hand. $8,000. It was more than enough to buy land, expand the ranch, secure their future. It was freedom. It was possibility, but more than the money, it was validation. Her grandmother had believed in her, had trusted her to use the inheritance wisely, had called her strong. Florence folded the letter carefully and put it in her pocket, then went outside to where Daisy waited. She was about to mount when she heard Robert calling her name. He rode up fast, his face tight with worry. Tom told me what happened. Are you all right? Did that man hurt you? I am fine, Florence said. He was not who I thought. He was a lawyer bringing news from Kansas City. She told him everything as they rode back to the ranch together. The trust fund, her grandmother's letter, the news about the banker's son. Robert listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he said, $8,000. That is a significant sum. What do you want to do with it? I do not know yet. I need to think. It is yours, Florence, your inheritance. You should use it however you see fit. She looked at him, this man who had given her everything, who had never asked her to be anything but herself. It is ours, she said. Yours and mine and James's. We are a family. Everything I have is yours. Florence, I mean it, Robert. I would not have anything without you. I would still be in Santa Fe, alone and desperate. You gave me a home and a family and a future. This money, it is an answer to prayers I did not even know how to pray. But it belongs to us, not just to me. Robert reached over and took her hand. Very well. Then we will decide together how to use it, but I want you to keep some just for yourself, for anything you might want or need. You deserve something that is just yours. They spent the next few weeks discussing possibilities. They could expand the ranch, buy more land and more cattle. They could build a bigger house. They could invest in improvements, a better barn, more reliable water sources. Or they could save it, put it aside for emergencies and future needs. In the end, they decided to do all of it in smaller measures. They bought an adjoining section of land to the east, expanding 3 rivers by a quarter. They hired a carpenter to add 2 more rooms to the house, one to serve as an office and one as a proper nursery for James. They bought 10 bred heifers from a rancher in Silver City, improving the quality of their herd. And they put $3,000 in the bank, untouched, saved for the future. Florence also used some of the money to buy books, lots of books, creating a small library in the new office. She bought dress fabric and sewing supplies, not because she needed them, but because she wanted them. She bought a good saddle and a new bridle for Daisy. Small things, personal things, things that were just for her. But the most important thing the money bought was peace of mind. Florence no longer woke in the night worried about survival, about what would happen if Robert was injured or the cattle died or any of the 100 disasters that could befall a ranch. They had a cushion now, a safety net. They were secure. As spring turned to summer, James grew from a baby into a lively, curious toddler. He took his first steps in the yard behind the house, stumbling from Robert's arms into Florence's. He said his first word, "Papa," and Robert beamed with pride for a week. He laughed at the chickens and petted the barn cats and charmed every ranch hand who came through. Florence found that motherhood suited her better than she had expected. Yes, it was exhausting and sometimes frustrating, but it was also joyful in ways she had not anticipated. Watching James discover the world, seeing his wonder at every new thing, made her feel like she was discovering it all over again too. One evening in late summer, after James was asleep and the house was quiet, Florence and Robert sat on the porch watching the sunset. Robert had his arm around her shoulders and Florence leaned against his solid warmth, feeling content. "You ever think about Kansas City?" Robert asked. "About what your life might have been like if things had gone differently?" Florence considered the question. "Sometimes. But not with regret, not anymore. I think everything happened the way it needed to. If the banker's son had kept his promises, I would have married him and I would have been miserable. He was not a good man. I can see that now, though I could not then. And if I had stayed in Kansas City, I never would have come here. I never would have met you or had James or built this life. So no, I do not regret how things turned out." "Even the hard parts?" Robert asked. "Even the hard parts. They made me who I am. They brought me here." Robert kissed the top of her head. "I am glad you are here. I cannot imagine this life without you. I cannot imagine it without you either." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and purple. Florence thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain and shame in Kansas City, the desperate flight to Santa Fe, the telegram that had seemed like the end of everything, the notice board outside the general store, the leap of faith that had led her to Robert. She thought about that first day in Chloride, when she had stepped off the stage not knowing what to expect, and Robert had stood there with his hat in his hands and his steady gray eyes, offering her a chance at something new. She thought about all the moments since. Learning to ride, settling into ranch life, the blizzard that had trapped them all inside, the night Robert had told her he loved her, the birth of their son, the lawyer from Kansas City with news of her grandmother's gift. Each moment had been a brick in the foundation of the life they were building together. Each challenge overcome had made them stronger. Each joy shared had bound them closer. "I am worthy," Florence said suddenly. "I am worthy of this life, of your love, of happiness. I finally believe that." Robert turned to look at her, his gray eyes warm in the fading light. Yes, you are. I am glad you finally see it. You helped me see it. You and everyone here. You all showed me my worth when I had forgotten it existed. Thank you for that. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I had given up on myself. I would never give up on you, Florence. Not ever. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and James, you are my whole world. Florence kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Robert stood and pulled her to her feet. "Come to bed," he said softly. "I want to show you properly how much I love you." Florence took his hand and followed him inside, into the home they had made together, into the life they were building brick by brick, day by day. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, the herd growing steadily. They hired more permanent hands as the work increased, good men who became part of the Three Rivers family. Tom eventually married a girl from Silver City and brought her to live in a small cabin they built on the north section of the property. Miguel's daughter came to visit from Mexico and ended up staying, marrying a cowboy from a neighboring ranch. James grew into a bright, energetic boy, helping with chores as soon as he was big enough, following Robert around the ranch like a devoted shadow. When he was 3, Florence gave birth to a daughter whom they named Margaret after Florence's mother. Margaret was quieter than James, more thoughtful, with Robert's steady temperament and Florence's green eyes. 2 years after Margaret, another son arrived, Samuel, who proved to be a handful from the moment he drew breath, always climbing, always exploring, giving Florence more gray hairs than she cared to count. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. The ranch continued to thrive. Florence's library grew until it filled 2 whole walls of the office, and she began teaching the children to read, using the books her grandmother's money had bought. Chen eventually retired and moved to town, though he still came out for Sunday dinners. A young couple took over the cooking and housekeeping duties, and Florence was grateful for the help as her family and responsibilities expanded. Florence stayed in touch with the lawyer, Mr. Peterson, exchanging letters occasionally. Through him, she learned that the banker's son had been released from prison after serving 7 years and had left Kansas City in disgrace. She felt nothing when she heard the news, no satisfaction or anger or pain. He was simply part of a past that no longer had any hold on her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Robert surprised Florence with a trip to Santa Fe. They left the children with Tom and his wife and spent 3 days in the territorial capital, staying in a nice hotel, eating in restaurants, shopping in stores far fancier than anything Chloride offered. On their last evening, they attended the theater, watching a traveling troupe perform a comedy that made Florence laugh until tears streamed down her face. Afterward, they walked back to the hotel under a sky full of stars, and Robert took her hand. "Are you happy?" he asked. It was a question he had asked her before, but this time there was no uncertainty in it, just simple curiosity. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Florence said honestly. "When I came to Chloride 10 years ago, I was running from my past, from shame and judgment and the belief that I was fundamentally unworthy of love. I thought I was coming here out of desperation because I had no other choice. But I was wrong. I was not running away. I was running toward something. Toward you, toward the life we have built together, toward the person I was meant to become." "You were always that person," Robert said. "I did not change you, I just helped you remember who you were." "Maybe," Florence said, "or maybe we changed each other. Maybe that is what love does. It helps us become the best versions of ourselves." They stopped outside the hotel, and Robert pulled her close, his arms encircling her waist. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, Florence Whitfield. But I thank God every day that you answered my notice, that you took a chance on a rancher you had never met, that you chose to build a life here with me." "I should be thanking you," Florence said. "You took a chance on me too. You married me knowing my past, knowing I was damaged and scared. You spent years proving to me that I was worthy of love and respect and happiness. You never gave up, even when I had given up on myself. If anyone deserves thanks, it is you." "Then let us agree we are both fortunate," Robert said, smiling. "Two broken people who found each other and built something whole." "Not broken," Florence corrected. "We were never broken, just hurt. There is a difference. Broken things cannot be fixed, but hurt things can heal, given time and care and love." Robert kissed her then, long and deep, and Florence melted into him, feeling the same spark she had felt that first night as his wife, intensified by 10 years of partnership and love and shared history. They returned to Three Rivers the next day, and the children ran out to meet them, James and Margaret and Samuel all talking at once, telling their parents everything they had done while they were gone. Florence hugged them close, breathing in the smell of sun and grass and childhood, feeling her heart expand with love. That night, after the children were in bed, Florence sat at the desk in the office and took out her journal, the one Robert had given her that first Christmas. She had filled 2 other volumes since then, chronicling the life of their family, the growth of the ranch, the small moments and large triumphs that made up their days. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. 10 years ago today, I stepped off a stage in Chloride, terrified and desperate, convinced I was unworthy of love or happiness. I thought I was making a bargain born of necessity, trading my labor for security, my companionship for survival. I could not have been more wrong. What I found in Chloride was not just security or survival, but love in its truest form. Robert showed me that worthiness is not something we earn through perfection, but something inherent in being human. He showed me that mistakes and scars do not define us, that we are so much more than our worst moments. He taught me that love is not about finding someone perfect, but about choosing someone imperfect and committing to them anyway, building something real and lasting from the raw materials of hope and trust and daily effort. I am not the same woman who arrived here 10 years ago. That woman was broken by shame, diminished by judgment, convinced she had nothing of value to offer. The woman I am now is whole, not because the scars have disappeared, but because I have learned to carry them with grace. I am a wife, a mother, a partner in building something larger than myself. I am loved and cherished and valued. I am worthy. It took me a long time to believe that, to truly accept it in my bones, but I believe it now. I am worthy of this life, these children, this man who chose me and keeps choosing me every day. And that worthiness was not something Robert gave me. It was always mine. He just helped me remember. She closed the journal and returned it to its place on the shelf. Then she went to find Robert to tell him good night, to fall asleep in his arms the way she had for 10 years, safe and loved and home. The children grew. James became a skilled horseman and a natural leader, taking on more responsibility around the ranch as he got older. Margaret proved to have a gift for numbers and took over keeping the ranch accounts when she was just 14, her neat columns always perfectly balanced. Samuel, true to form, was the adventurous one, the risk-taker, giving his parents heart palpitations with his latest exploits. When James was 17, a pretty girl named Caroline came to Chloride with her family, homesteaders trying their luck at farming. James was smitten immediately, and after a proper courtship, they married when he turned 19. Robert helped them build a house on the eastern section of Three Rivers, and James began managing that part of the ranch. Margaret fell in love with a teacher who came to start a school in Chloride, a gentle man named David who loved books as much as she did. They married when Margaret was 21, and she convinced David to build their house near the ranch so she could stay close to her family. Samuel, predictably, was the last to settle down. He tried his hand at mining, at scouting, at a dozen different ventures before finally admitting that ranching was in his blood. He came home at 23 and threw himself into learning everything Robert could teach him about running 3 rivers. Florence watched her children build their own lives and marveled at how different they all were, how uniquely themselves. She and Robert had given them roots and wings, stability and freedom, and they had used those gifts to become capable, independent adults. Grandchildren arrived, first one and then another and another, until the ranch echoed with the sound of children's laughter again. Florence loved being a grandmother, loved having babies to rock and toddlers to chase and older children to teach. Robert proved to be an indulgent grandfather, carrying children on his shoulders and telling elaborate stories that made them shriek with delight. On a warm evening in late summer, when Florence was 52 and Robert was 61, they sat together on the porch as they had so many times over the years. Their hands were more lined now, their hair more gray, but the connection between them was as strong as ever. "Do you ever think about that notice?" Florence asked. "The one I answered 30 years ago," Robert smiled. "Sometimes. Best investment I ever made posting that notice. You took such a risk inviting a stranger to marry you. It did not feel like a risk, it felt like hope." "I was lonely, Florence. The ranch was doing well, but I was living half a life. I needed someone to share it with, and then you came and everything made sense." Florence leaned her head on his shoulder. "I came here thinking I was worthless. It took you years to convince me otherwise." "No," Robert said. "It took you years to believe what I could see from the beginning. You were always worthy, Florence. You were always enough. The problem was never you. It was everyone else who was too blind to see your value." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for 3 decades. 3 Rivers had changed over the years, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful ranches in the territory. But the heart of it remained the same: family, hard work, loyalty, love. "Thank you," Florence said softly. "For what? For seeing me. For choosing me. For spending 30 years proving to me that I was worthy of love. For never giving up even when I had given up on myself." Robert turned and cupped her face in his weathered hands. "Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did, Florence. You made it easy by being exactly who you are, by bringing your strength and kindness and stubborn determination to everything you touched. You built this life as much as I did. You raised our children to be good, capable people. You made this house a home. You are the foundation everything else is built on. If anyone should be grateful, it is me." "Then we are both grateful," Florence said, echoing the words they had spoken in Santa Fe so many years ago. 2 people who found each other and built something beautiful. Robert kissed her soft and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of partnership and love and commitment. When they pulled apart, Florence smiled at him, her heart full to overflowing. She thought about the scared, ashamed girl who had stepped off the stage in Chloride, convinced she was damaged beyond repair. She thought about the journey from that moment to this one, all the small steps and large leaps, all the pain and joy and everyday moments that had brought her here. She was not that girl anymore. She was Florence Whitfield, wife and mother and grandmother, partner in building one of the most successful ranches in New Mexico territory. She was loved and valued and worthy, not because someone had given her those things, but because she had claimed them for herself. Robert had not made her worthy, but he had held up a mirror and helped her see what had always been there, waiting to be recognized and embraced. He had given her time and space and endless patience while she learned to believe in herself. He had loved her unconditionally, not despite her flaws but including them, seeing her as whole rather than broken. That was the real gift he had given her, not worthiness itself, but the recognition of worthiness that had always been her birthright. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Florence took Robert's hand and squeezed it gently. "Let us go inside," she said. "The grandchildren are staying tonight, and I promised Margaret I would help with bedtime." They stood together, these two people who had taken a chance on each other 3 decades ago, who had built a life from faith and hope and stubborn determination. They walked into the house hand in hand, into the warmth and noise and chaos of family, into the life they had created together. And Florence, who had once believed herself unworthy of love, knew beyond any doubt that she had been wrong. She had always been worthy. She had always been enough. She had always deserved every good thing this life had brought her. It had just taken the right person, at the right time, with the right heart, to help her see the truth that had been there all along. She was worthy. She had always been worthy, and she always would be.